It's with great pleasure that I would like to introduce our next guest, Garry Breitkreutz. Garry and his lovely wife Lydia made a major effort in the middle of in the early parts of a Canadian federal election, which the Prime Minister of Canada has asked him to help the party to get re-elected, which I understand they may or may not occur. Garry, when we asked, took the time to come over here, and people said, why isn't he here longer? Well, a big part of the reason is he's got to be back campaigning in Canada, not for himself, because this is the type of guy he is, and if you get a chance to chat to him during the evening, you'll find it's a rare event, an honest, nice politician. And he's come out here and here and gone in 5 days, which is a big effort. You know, it's a long way from Canada to come down, and he's not even on the west coast of Canada. He's in the central parts of Canada, central west. And Garry, as I said before, seven terms as a federal member of Parliament. A fascinating story. I'll let him tell it, but I've heard it a couple of times as we've talked with politicians. And I think it stunned a couple of them today to realise he didn't come from this super pro-gun background. He was a guy that looked at it and had a change of heart when he saw the facts because of his own constituents. So with no more ado, I'd like to introduce our very special guest speaker, the Honourable Garry Breitkreutz.
Thank you very much, Graham, and it is indeed a pleasure to be here, to be invited. It's an honor, in fact, to be recognized enough to have you invite me down here. Graham has been a tremendous host. Jan Lindsley has, I don't know where she is, but I need to thank her for, right here, of course, yeah, for chauffeuring us around and introducing us to all the different politicos that we met. Various people. We've had some very good meetings over the last couple of days, and it's been an honor as well to speak with your Justice Minister, Minister of the Opposition, all kinds of the people that are the movers and shakers and decision makers in your Parliament. And it's been good to listen to Samara. I have read her articles, her papers that she's written, and you have a gem here that you need to really listen to and be proud of. The research that she does is invaluable and will be a tremendous asset to you all as you move forward. And so I really need to express my appreciation as well for the work that she does. And I'm glad I didn't get between you and your food. I thought for a while there I was going to be delayed and maybe prevent you from eating. I would have been a pretty owly group here by the time I was done. So, as Graham said, I was not always on the side of the issue that I am on now. I was elected as a member of Parliament in 1993. A new political party was started called the Reform Party, and we had some very strong policies. People really liked what we had to say, and we started out in Western Canada. The government that preceded us was the Progressive Conservative government. They had approximately 170 members of Parliament. When we came along, they, in that 93 election, were reduced to 2 MPs, if you can imagine. I think that was one of the most earth-shaking elections in Canadian history. And part of it was the vote split. So the Liberals, which are the center-left party, in Canada and felt they deserved to have government forever almost, then formed the government, and they are the ones who brought in the gun registry. Anyway, I was invited by my constituents at the end of January, at the beginning of 1994, to come to a meeting in a hall in a small community in the northern part of my riding on an evening where it was minus 39 degrees Celsius, and that's a bit chilly. I drove out there, and it's life-threatening when you're driving a car, and if something goes wrong, you've got issues, especially in that part of the country, because there's very few people around there and to help you. I went to that, and the hall was packed, because they were very, very concerned about what the government was planning on doing in regards to gun control. And I was not expecting to speak, but they got me up on the podium and, wanted me to make a speech. Well, this was the first speech I ever made once I was elected. So I got up there and I blah, 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 something about, well, how can anybody be opposed to gun control? It's a good thing, it'll save lives, and probably, and they politely challenged me to scratch below the surface on the issue and report back to them how this was going to work. I was a naive, newly elected, rather young MP, and younger than I am now, and 22 years ago, and I accepted that challenge. Very honestly, I said, yes, okay, I will go back and I'll check what this is all about and report to you how it's going to be effective and so on, and get your response. And so I got a researcher by the name of Dennis Young, who helped me go and start looking at this issue. He's a ex-RCMP officer, and really worked hard. And we were a 1-2 punch on this. I couldn't have done what I did without him. He's been just terrific, just as Samara is invaluable to you. And we started looking at this. And it wasn't very long before I did a 180. I mean, I had to reverse my position completely. How can a gun registry, which is simply putting a piece of paper beside a firearm, in any way prevent anybody from doing anything with the firearm or control crime in any way? So we started looking at this, and we put in access to information requests. In fact, by the time we were done, about 15 years later, we had put in over 500, almost 600 access to information requests. That's a process whereby the government has to reveal to you what's happening behind the scenes. Most of what we got was redacted. It was blacked out. The government tried to hide from us. But once in a while, the bureaucrats slipped up. And we started putting together some of the things that were going on. For example, the costs. We were told by the minister, by the way, he said that when he became Justice Minister, Alan Rock, he said that only the police and military really should have firearms. Well, this got people excited immediately. But anyway, that gave you the mindset of him. And then he also said it's going to cost about $2 million to taxpayers to put this in place. Well, through access to information, we found out that this was a little bit off the mark. In fact, within a few years, it already had gone 500 times over budget. I mean, it was going to 500 million, going on to $1 billion that taxpayers were forking out to pay. I don't know what your registry here is costing, and in Canada, they put the registry into the criminal code, which overrides the rights of the provinces to regulate property. That's how they were able to put it in across the country, because really, according to the Constitution of Canada, it's a regulation of property and should belong. So the Liberals overrode that. And we began to publicize this, and everybody said, oh, you Breitkreutz, you're lying, you don't know what you're talking about. And it really hit the fan in 2002 when we were able to convince the second Auditor General that we were working with that they should do an audit of this thing. And she looked at our numbers, and they appeared quite credible. And when she released her report and verified what I was saying was correct, that's when it hit the fan. And I was on talk shows across the country continuously. Everybody was very, very interested in a program there. And that really, really is where it took off. But it took a lot of work. And it took the support and patience of gun owners to get to that point. I'm going to give you a little bit, and you probably know a lot of this, but I'm going to give you a little bit of the results of this, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I've told your justice minister yesterday and some of the other people that I've met here, because I really wanted to share, and that's my purpose in coming here, I wanted to share our experience in Canada, and what can he learn, what can everyone here learn about that. And it's not that you can't access these things on the internet and so on, but sometimes maybe just a personal contact can help. In Canada, and Samara has verified here this in Australia, firearms or crime with firearms has continued to decline. In fact, the slope, the downward slope, is constant from the 1990s before I was even elected, before the Liberal government was elected. Firearms crime, suicides, everything was on a decline. And it never changed when they put in the registry. And as Samara has so well described, the bureaucracy tried to hide this. They fudged the figures. One of the things they did was, when they talked about firearms involved in crime, if they found a firearm anywhere in the home, they linked it to the crime. It had nothing to do possibly with the crime. But that's how they inflated, and sometimes it inflated the numbers by 4 times as a number of firearms involved in crime. These are things that we uncovered. But that's how the people that deal with these things, bureaucrats and so on, try to manipulate public opinion and so on. And putting in place, and the registry was in place for 12 years, more than 10 years, 12, 13 years before we finally scrapped it 3 years ago. One of the things that is often thrown at us, well, we don't want to be like the big bad USA, okay? We're not American. This is a mantra I hear all the time in Canada. We don't want to be like the Americans. And so they compare Canada and US statistics. A very unfair comparison. If you look carefully at the numbers, there is a few pockets in the US where crime involving firearms takes place. Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. It's tied in with the drug trade, with gang activities, and that kind of thing. In my province of Saskatchewan, and the neighboring province on the west, Alberta and Manitoba, our culture is very similar to that of the states right across the border, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota. And the laws in those states, gun laws, are virtually non-existent. I mean, I don't even know if there's any restrictions on firearms in those states. So, what would you expect? You would expect that firearms crime in those states would be higher because they don't have any controls. There's no registry, there's no licensing. In fact, crime involving firearms in those neighboring states where the culture is very similar to us, it's all prairie farmers, it's all rural, is 60% lower than in Canada, where we have much stricter firearms laws. So these are the kind of statistics that we began to publicize, and that really, I think, influenced the whole issue. Something else that's never mentioned is that firearms crime in the US is falling more rapidly than in Canada, where we have stricter controls on firearms. And again, like Samara mentioned, conveniently ignoring some of these, I think, important statistics. People often ask me, well, that shooting on Parliament Hill that we had a while back, which affected you here in Australia, because all of a sudden the security around your parliamentary and legislative places tightened up because of our experience in Canada. And I was right in the middle of this. I was about 10 steps away from where the shooter was finally killed. We were sitting in a meeting. The Prime Minister was addressing us, and I was sitting right near the door where the shooter ran by. He killed somebody at the War Memorial, and then he ran up on Parliament Hill. And Canadians are very trusting. He had no trouble getting. He shot the guy at the door and then came running down what we call the Hall of Honor. And at that point, the Prime Minister turned white. After the first 2 shots, we realized something's going on. There was construction going on, and we thought, boy, you know, they're sure putting those explosions off at kind of an odd time. And there was eventually there were 61 shots that took place, and you know, they going through the doors, and they've left the marks in the doors just as a reminder to people, you know, that terrorism is a serious thing. So people ask me, well, doesn't that change your opinion on gun laws and gun control? No. This person was deranged. He didn't have a registered gun. He didn't have a license. In fact, they don't even know where he got it from. You can't legislate against insanity. You can't legislate against somebody who goes on the internet and picks up an ideology that just doesn't go with what we as Canadians value. And so it didn't change it in any way, because our registry, if it had been in place, would never have prevented it anyway. A few years ago, Mom Boucher, who was the head of the Hells Angels biker gang, and I think you're familiar with that, was in court in a murder trial. And they brought his 3 guns in to, you know, as evidence. And he sits back there, well, did you bring in the registration certificates too? Hells Angels was mocking the whole system. They registered all their guns. If they can register their firearms, what good is the registry doing? And you know, the initial response, and this is typical of politicians, one incident can cause them to come up with some kind of legislation, and politicians have to create the impression that somehow they are making our lives better. So they'll come up with laws of all kinds, and I mean, you can imagine the number of laws we have in Canada in regards to some of the issues that have come up. And so there was a shooting in the late 1980s in Montreal where 14 young women students were killed. And so the government said, well, we have to do something. So that's when they dreamed up the gun registry. The bureaucrats recommended that this is probably what needed to be done. And so that was the beginning of it, and they put it in place. Lo and behold, Dawson College happened after they had put this in place, where another 8 students were killed. Didn't make any difference. So I think that's clear evidence that what was portrayed by the politicians is really going to make our lives safer really didn't do a thing. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I made that clear to all the people I've met with. I'm just sharing my experience with registration and so on. But the registry that was put in place, and the Auditor General confirmed this, the registry that was put in place was riddled with errors. She estimated that 90% of the registration certificates contained some kind of error. Not the whole thing wrong, but some kind of an error. That's huge. And I understand that there's quite a large error rate on the registration certificates here as well. So the police in Canada do not trust the information that's on there. It hasn't changed any procedures. I read one of your people defending the registry here as saying, well, it's a good thing for police because they know if they go to a domestic dispute, you know, whether there's firearms present. It does not affect their procedures. In fact, it may have cost the lives of 2 policemen in Canada. One of the police in Quebec looked at the registry, and she went to this home to settle some kind of an issue there, and she was shot. She went thinking there were no guns at that residence. And there's another example in Ontario, very similar to that. So that really has made it quite clear to the police that it doesn't work. And in my province, the chiefs of police came up to me, there's 12 different departments, came up to me and said, one of the first things we tell new people coming on to our detachment is, do not look at that gun registry. You can have the impression that there are guns there or not guns there. And sometimes if the impression is that there's a gun there and somebody comes to the door and the policeman, in one case, the fellow was holding a black stapler in his hand and the policeman thought it was a gun. He almost shot that person. I mean, it is so dangerous to have the registry. They always defend it as saying, oh, it might save a life. It's probably cost more lives. In fact, if you would have taken the $2 billion that has been spent on the gun registry, you could have bought, I think, 250 some MRIs, those medical imaging machines to detect cancer. You could have put them right across Canada, and we're short. Our health system is strapped for cash. Or, for $500 million, the Ontario Attorney General said he could put 5,000 to 6,000 more police on the streets of his province. What would do more good? What would save lives? So when you put in place something like this and you're spending money on it, it's taxpayers' money doesn't grow on trees. I mean, you are taking it from somewhere else, and you actually could save lives if you put it in in something that would be more useful. Okay, well, one of the issues here, and it's timely, I guess, that I came right in the middle of this debate, is the Adler lever action shotgun. The questions you need to ask, and I think it's good to sometimes not just tell people things, but ask questions. What is the scientific evidence, or what evidence, factual evidence, is there behind that restriction? We had the police poked us in, the chiefs of police anyway, poked us in the eye a bit because they were upset that we're getting rid of the registry and all that kind of thing. And so they started reclassifying firearms. Just recently they had the fiasco with the Swiss brand of firearms. It had been legal to have these guns in Canada for 11 or 12 years, and then all of a sudden they decided to reclassify this firearm because it had like a pistol grip. And what is the evidence that that is more dangerous than any other kind of firearm? I mean, it's a simple, honest question. And so, well, reclassification doesn't really work anymore with rifles and shotguns in Canada. When they reclassified that, we don't have a registry. So all of a sudden, they made criminals out of people who had no idea that they had something in their possession that was now reclassified. It was illegal for them to have if they didn't have a particular license to hold that firearm. So safety training has reduced accidental deaths, and I support that. I support licensing because a criminal background check is a good thing, and in order to acquire a firearm, I think it's fine to have people go through a few hoops and hurdles. But if you have a licensing system, you can also maybe, if someone has some kind of a problem, you can maybe go and remove the firearms if they've committed a criminal offense and that kind of thing. So the licensing can be good in some cases. Mentally ill people maybe could be checked out and so on. So that I'm not opposed to all kinds of gun laws. We have a radical element in Canada that doesn't want to have any gun laws, and sometimes they make my life quite difficult because the government can say, well, we can't please anybody, so we're not going to try and please, or we're not going to try and do anything that the gun community wants. And one of the messages I have for you is that it's good to try to speak with one voice. We have competing organizations in Canada that are trying to boost their membership, and some of them come up with statements that really the general public are upset with, because there's one group that wants to get rid of licensing completely, you know, saying it's their God-given right to own firearms without the government interfering. It's difficult in this day and age to completely go down that path. I mean, it just won't work. And so they compete with other organizations who are much more politically astute for these things. And one of the things that I've been trying to do is to bring the organizations together. I talk to the leadership from time to time if they're coming out with statements that really don't help further the issues that really need to be dealt with. And so I don't know if that's happening here in Australia, but that's the experience that I had in Canada. And government can dismiss the voice of gun owners if there isn't some kind of a unified message that comes out with all that. Another issue that I was heavily involved in was the United Nations gun marking issue. Australia signed on to it, Canada never did. That was a requirement that all firearms that were being imported had to have a special mark put on. And it's very costly. It would have increased the cost of firearms anywhere from $200 to $400, because the requirement was to put the mark on there so it was very deep, so that they had to then redo the manufacture of the firearms that were being imported into Canada. It was kind of a backdoors registry. And I raised the issue, well, we already have unique identification. All the guns in the last 10 or 20 years have been uniquely identified because they have a serial number that's different from all others. And so when I raised this and said, well, we don't need to sign on to this, it's completely unnecessary. It'll just restrict the ability of gun owners to get firearms imported and to buy what they would like. And so the police came and said, no, that's not true. There are many duplicate serial numbers. And I thought, that's really strange. So we started doing some research on this. And we found out that between 25 and 30,000 revolvers that the police all had in the registry system for handguns, which we've had since 1934, in that registry system, they were all the same. The person who recorded it didn't know a barrel from a bullet. And so she wrote down the model instead of the serial number. So that was the reason that 25 to 30,000 guns all had the same registration number or identification number. So I mean, and the police were ahead of me. They had been talking to the minister and saying, no, Breitkreutz is wrong. I mean, you know, their guns aren't all uniquely identified now. So you have to be very, very careful, because sometimes people will try to twist the minister into knots, and again, Samara's done a good job of explaining how that happens. Politics is all about creating impressions, and if you can create the impression that you're improving public safety, and that's what the Liberals did back in 1995, they got a lot of support from the public. But I want to share this with you. We did some of our own analysis, and we found that the people who didn't own firearms really didn't vote on that issue. They didn't care enough about it to make it a ballot issue. But firearms owners, and the estimate is between 2 and 5% of the vote is affected by that issue. They voted on that issue. And Wayne Easter, a good friend of mine, even though he's liberal, was the justice minister at the time, in the year around 2000, and a few years after that, the Liberals went into a minority government situation and eventually lost government. And they did their own analysis on this, and there was also analysis of 4 university professors from 4 different universities who looked at why the Liberals declined and lost government. And they determined that they lost approximately 60 seats on the gun issue. So if you have a strong voice, and if you have a political party that's really willing to make it a policy and to carry something forward, like an issue like this, like in Canada, we really campaigned as Conservatives on the fact that we're going to get rid of the long gun registry if we are elected, and we carried through with it. It was a tough battle. We had a lot of MPs elected out of Toronto and so on, and they were very nervous, but we pointed out to them that this isn't going to cost them any votes in Toronto. In fact, it could even gain them votes. There's just as many hunters and shooters in the our biggest city is only 2.5 million compared to some of yours, but it didn't end up hurting us at all. In fact, it helped us form government. And that justice minister warned the young Liberals in his party who wanted to bring back a policy to reinstitute the gun registry that don't go there, folks. It cost us government once. We don't want to go there again. So the battle you have is fighting against politicians who want to create impressions. And the only thing that we found that we could counterbalance that with was getting out factual information. I mentioned the over 500 access to information requests. We kept putting out news releases all the time. The national media didn't cover them much, but you know what happened? All the gun clubs and all the wildlife federations and all the hunters and so on began to distribute our information. So we bypassed the national media, and we were able to get out to the masses of people the information that eventually changed the whole mind. At one point, they did a survey, 76% of Canadians were opposed to the gun registry. A lot of it was because of the cost overruns, $2 billion. I mean, that was just, and the $2 billion doesn't even include the compliance cost, the cost to gun owners to deal with this. So that's kind of, I think, one of the ways to battle the adverse political feelings that may develop over this, and politicians are always scared to do anything that might lessen their ratings in any way. One of the negative things, and I made this point to the Justice Minister, one of the really negative things that happened in Canada is that the registry became a shopping list for criminals. One of the access to information results that we got back, and I'm surprised they even released this to us, in a 4-year period, there were over 300 breaches of the registry. That means they don't know who got the information. They don't know if some secretary in some police department sold it to somebody for a few $1,000s, or people hacked in, and people, you know, hackers today can get into that kind of information and download the list. And so that information, which is a violation of the privacy rights of gun owners, to have that list out there. A registry is really a very negative thing in that respect. There are anecdotal evidence that people that registered some very valuable firearms had their houses broken into, and the thieves didn't take some of the nice televisions and other equipment that they had. They searched through everything until they found the gun safe, broke into it, and stole the firearms. So it becomes a shopping list for criminals, and so that can be a very, very negative thing as well. Another note I have here is that in Toronto, and we've had handgun registry since 1934, 90% of the handguns involved in crime are unregistered. What does that tell you? Criminals don't comply with it. And even if they did, Mom Boucher, the biker gang head, registered him. He mocked the whole system. It didn't make any difference as to how effective those guns were. So that's also a very negative. Another real negative that I mentioned to the people I met is that bringing in this law has really ruptured a good relationship between the police and the gun-owning community, because they don't even report thefts anymore of firearms, because they became the target. It was too easy for the policeman to come and say, oh, you didn't store it properly, and they charged the victim rather than the criminal. In fact, they often couldn't even find the criminal. So having the guns registered made no difference. But that's a very serious problem, because the police depend on the cooperation of good people to do their work. And if those good people suddenly become reluctant to work together with the police, that's a major issue. Another interesting thing we discovered and uncovered is that gun owners are 1/3 less likely to commit a crime. A licensed gun owner is 1/3 less to be involved in a violent crime than your average citizen. That's an interesting statistic. They tend to be more upstanding and more honorable members of the community than anybody else. Let me just review some of the main points that I want to leave you with. Is you need to find key allies within your political parties, within your parliament, amongst your politicians. Get involved in a political party if you can, because that's what happened in Canada. Gun owners began to really get involved in a political party that shared their views. Work for them, because then they'll listen to you, because they often are strapped for workers and strapped for cash. Get sound facts. Do your homework. Get good research, and you have someone here who is doing that. And then work together. I think that's very important. And emphasize the costs. If you took that money and spent it on something that would really save lives, that would really do a lot. Oh, there's one more thing I want to mention. Once we got rid of the gun registry, I started something called the Outdoors Caucus. And it's an organization in Canada now, and it's growing dramatically within Parliament. And what it does is protect hunters and anglers and trappers and sport shooters. And it has become very popular. We put on a gun shoot just off Parliament Hill every year. And the first year we only had like 15 people. The second year it tripled to 45, and this last year it tripled again. So in 3 years, and the main participants are women. They love to come and try out all the different firearms. And everything is available there. And it reduces the fear or the anxiety that is often created by the media and so on. And we found that that is a very good thing. And also to promote hunting and so on, because for young people to get out into nature and just experience the great outdoors, and Canada of course is noted for that, really has made a difference. And this has really helped galvanize the gun community as well and bring them all together. And all political parties participate in this. It's not a partisan organization. So that is something where you can be proactive. And maybe you can get some of your politicians to do it. Maybe you have that here, I don't know, but I haven't heard of it. Get something like that organized and start working in it, because it's people from outside of Parliament that have really helped me in getting this going. Anyway, I hope you found this useful in some small way, and I look forward to your questions. I thank you very much for inviting me here. I've really enjoyed my time, and I asked if I could maybe go out into the outback, because so I'm going to be going out there this weekend to, was it Long Reach? Long Reach, yes. Because I've always wanted to do that if I ever had a chance to come to Australia. So thank you again very much.
My name's David Brown. A good friend of mine through aviation is a man by the name of Tom Gresham, who many people here in the audience would know. He's always saying that the single biggest problem with a registry is that it is actually a means of confiscation, and I was very keen to hear what your experiences were in Canada, and in particular you mentioned the theft of data. Now, it would probably unsettle a lot of people in this room to know that that's occurred very severely here in this state, and it is not widely known. My question to you was, has any of the people that you've discussed, had discussions with this week, talked to you about the loss of that data here in Queensland? Because it's been buried.
Well, it's buried because they didn't tell me about it. No, I haven't heard anything about that. That would be an interesting research
If
aspect.
Jeff or anybody else down the front here wants to talk to me later, I'm happy to talk.
Sure. Yep.
G'day mate, my name's Gareth. Both yourself and Samara, what have you been experiences with researching your data on this matter? Is it collected the difference between firearms used in firearms crime and the actual licensed and lawfully owned firearms used in firearms crime?
Yeah, we tried to get Statistics Canada to do that, and so far nobody has gathered any data on that. That would be a very good thing to research. I think that's an excellent idea, but to my knowledge, nobody has really done anything. The closest we've come to that is that firearms owners are 1/3 less likely to be involved in violent crime than the general community. That's about the closest we can come to that.
Paul Feeney's my name. When the registry system was in place, was there any form or any level of civil disobedience in the form of firearm owners refusing to register firearms or resisting the register of firearms?
There was a couple incidents openly. One person actually publicly displayed the fact that he was not going to comply with government laws. And they made an example of him. They just went, and it's still in the courts now, and they now are trying to take away his house as proceeds of crime. The government has just been vicious in Ontario, the Liberal government, in attacking this person. But to get to the root of what you're asking, we went and did a lot of research and found that in the 1960s, before any hint of gun laws were coming in, the government determined there were about 11 million firearms in Canada. Then, subsequently, Dennis Young and I went and found the import and export numbers for every year. And it varies greatly, but it averaged about 250,000 guns being added to the supply every year. So by the time the registry had been put in place, there was between 18 and 21 million guns in Canada. The registry captured approximately 7 to 8 million guns. So that gives you an idea that approximately 1/3 of the firearms were registered. Does that qualify as civil disobedience? I think so. Yeah, they were very, very suspicious. I'm from a German background. You can tell by my name, very difficult name, Breitkreutz. But they, during the Second World War, they put in place a registry, and then they, in my province, which has the highest number of German is the leading ethnic group, they went and confiscated all their firearms. And they held them for about 4 years. So people thought, well, what good does a registry unless you want to confiscate firearms? Yeah. So there was, people were very, very leery. I mean, the joke was, why are gun owners watering their lawn, oiling their lawns, so that their guns don't rust, that they buried. Okay.
One last question. Would you like?
I'm scared.
Yes, my name's Darryl White. Very short question. Would you like a job in our federal parliament?
I would be, if it took me 17 years to accomplish what I did in Canada, I'm not sure how long it would take here.
The weather's better.
I agree. Yeah, that would be one plus.
And if you go out to Longreach, get used to the term varbar.
What is that?
Vast areas of bugger all. It's huge. Huge.
Okay, I love it.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Yeah,
wonderful
okay.
talk.
Thank you very much. Okay. Okay.
Thank you. And